Hi, I'm John Lavelle, and I'm here with attorney Joshua Ramos from Ramos Ramos, and we're here to talk about the Brian Flores case. It's going to be Brian Flores versus the New York Giants and the NFL. Hi, Josh. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Quite the uproar in the legal and pro sports world in the last 24 hours,
Yeah,
from coaches' hirings to a damning lawsuit coming out as well.
I know. I know. This is very interesting to me. Didn't see it come out. I mean, like it kind of blindsided me. I know that Flores was let go at Miami, and there was talk originally that they let him go for communication problems, but I think we're kind of getting down to maybe what's really going on.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think it was a shock to everybody, and us as I think we're the biggest, some of the biggest Bills fans around.
Yeah.
We being in the division of the Miami Dolphins, as fans, we are really abreast of what's going on with other teams. And Flores was pretty impressive down there with the weapons and organization he had, and I think it was a shock. And from what I recall of the national media and ESPN and NFL Network, a lot of their sports pundits were shocked as well.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Brian Flores is suing the NFL and the Giants for racial discrimination. What's the background for suing on the basis of racial discrimination?
Okay, so I'm going to break down about 3 years of law school and 6, 7, 8, 10 years of training down into about 20 seconds of history just for a history lesson. So it all started post-Civil War era where with the passage of the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. 13th Amendment said no more slavery. 14th Amendment is where they took all of the constitutional rights and said, hey, this is no longer just applied to the federal government. These constitutional rights apply to the states as well. There's more to it, but I don't think we have 2 years to go over it in con law classes. But that, at the end of the day, that wasn't good enough. We start looking at the civil rights era, and we were saying, hey, I know we have the 13th Amendment, but that's not going to cut it for us. We are not as second-class citizens, as African Americans, as minorities. We are equal. And, then we go back to the 50s with Brown versus Board of Education where, hey, separate is no longer equal. You can't have a black school and a white school. They're not the same. They're not equal. Yeah. And then the civil rights movement with such greats like MLK, and they came down and eventually the government passed the Civil Rights Acts, which weren't perfect, but it was something that was worked on in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 90s, 80s. Everything kept evolving, and we're still evolving today. And that eventually led to what the statute here is being sued under, which is 42 USC Section 1981, or what people just call a 1981 case.
So what does that statute say?
Okay, so in that statute specifically, it says all people, I'm not going to quote it, but it says all people have the right to make and enforce contracts, to sue, to be parties, to give evidence, just as white people can. So that basically is saying when you are making and enforcing a contract, all people, including minorities, are to be treated equally. And if not, you can get sued over it. And here, that is the case. It was, hey, I wasn't treated equally. The NFL is not treating the black community equally, and therefore I am suing under Section 1981.
Nice. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of the Flores suit, I noticed that it's a class action. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you go to the complaint itself, it says right on the top, it kind of lets you know this is a proposed class action. A class action, and we see this all the time when it's someone versus Johnson & Johnson or some big medical provider or some prescription company. It's, hey, there are so many people who are aggrieved that it would be impractical to name everybody. For instance, in these medication cases, there's probably millions of people who have taken a certain prescription, and you can't name that on a paper. Here, there's probably hundreds of African-American male and females who have been aggrieved by the NFL. And they're saying it's so many people, I just can't name them all. And That doesn't mean it is a class action yet, because it technically has to get certified by the judge handling the case, and he'll say, they'll do their evidence and say, hey, there's enough evidence here to prove that there is enough people that's impossible to name where it is a class, and you can sue on behalf of everybody. And now, even if he doesn't get class certification, that doesn't mean the case is dead. Rather, his case survives individually, and he can still use the systemic racism as proof to how he was aggrieved in the National Football League and by these teams.
Nice. All right. Well, now that we've gone through that, let's get into the actual suit.
Okay, so Mr. Flores is suing the National Football League, the New York Football Giants, the Miami Dolphins, the Broncos, and then John Doe 1 through 29, which is the remaining teams in the NFL. And this is a case where he's essentially proving systematic racism and discrimination by saying, hey, there's 32 non-blacks that own the NFL, that are the owners of these teams. There's 81% white people are the general managers. There's 94% non-black people who are coaches. Mm-hmm. And it's primarily an African-American league. And I think the Washington Post posted an article that, let me just see, I have some stats written down, that as of last year, nearly 58% of the NFL was African-American, and almost 25% was white.
Wow.
So we're talking the majority of the players are African-American. Almost 95% of the coaches around there are white. All the teams are led and managed by white people and owned by all non-black people as well. So the suit is, as a result of the systemic discrimination, these coaches have been aggrieved, and they've lost out on opportunities, lost out on jobs, were fired early as a result of being African-American.
So now tell me about the lawsuit and the way it's drawn up itself.
So I've read this complaint a couple of times, and I think this complaint is a thing of beauty. It's powerful, it's scary. If I was the defense, we're going to tell my clients, if I'm defending them, hey, put out a statement that we want, to be inclusive versus exclusive, and we'll deny the allegations. Standard language that we would put out as attorneys on behalf of our clients. But he really gets in there, and he gives you a powerful statement up front. It's almost like they're also trying to get the media on your side by saying, hey, I'm not going to make a form complaint and say, racism occurred, I was subject to racism in making the contract and couldn't get the contract, therefore I want to sue. It wasn't bare bones. And he gets in there right away, and he talks about the very first statement is, sorry, here's a text message from Bill Belichick 3 days before Brian Flores even interviewed, and it's not even a part of the complaint, but it's just preliminary, so to speak. And it's, sorry, I effed up. I double-checked and misread the text. I think they're naming Brian Dable. This is 3 days before Brian Flores even interviewed. And it's basically saying, I was never getting this job. I was a shill of an interview. And throughout it, there's exhibits listed here. He goes through the text messages with Bill Belichick, and he's literally just showing, hey, here's the screenshot of all the text messages between me and Bill 3 days before I interviewed. And if I was legitimately getting the job, how does everyone know this? Or legitimately interviewing, sorry.
Not to get off topic and off course here, but so if I'm Bill Belichick, how am I feeling right now? Am I going to get subpoenaed or, what am I looking at?
I'd probably be annoyed. Hey, I sent a personal text, but honestly, I call it like my grandpa on the phone, like calling the wrong guy or texting me Google searches or something. He texted the wrong person, and now Bill Belichick is witness number one as to how did he hear about it.
Yeah.
During depositions. He's the first guy we're calling for a non-party deposition to say, who told you about this? Just so we can find out, because the goal is during discovery to find out the actual decision-making process. Mm-hmm. He's witness number one.
Yeah.
Because they're going to deny everything internally. Oh, we never confirmed anything. We wanted to wait till we interviewed everybody. Then how does he know this 3 days ahead of time? Who told you? And then if it's someone inside the staff, because a lot of coaches know each other, who told that person until we get someone up high enough on the chain of command, because someone's going to know somewhere.
Yeah.
And just along the lines, it's the number one way, that they're going to prove racism is by showing that the Giants did things that were racially motivated.
How does Brian Flores intend to prove that what they did was racially motivated?
Well, they're going to deny that they have never done anything that was racially motivated. And you can counteract that by saying, here's exactly why you did it, and here's the proof. So in the NFL, they have what's called the Rooney Rule. And they've also made changes to it. They keep messing around with it, trying to make it better for the system. The Rooney Rule essentially is you have to interview a few diverse candidates from outside your organization. And diverse means a minority. It means black, Muslim, could be Hispanic, but you can't, basically, someone who's not a white man. And that's the rule. They have to do it. And essentially, he's saying they only interviewed me because I was black to comply. And it was a sham of an interview. How do you prove it was a sham and racially motivated? One, you have the rule that it's the Rooney Rule. And then two, we have confirmation days ahead of time from third parties who are not part of any organization or Mr. Flores' camp that he was never getting the job. So we're interviewing a black man just because we have this rule, and he ain't never getting the job. So we have the text from Bill Belichick. And then also other people inside the organization were texting around, and I think actually it's in his complaint too that the interview was a sham because that some other newscaster on Twitter is being informed from the Giants organization on January 28th that Daboll is getting the job and is the next head coach, and Flores hasn't interviewed yet. So we have all these people confirming inside the organization that Daboll's getting the job, and whether or not he's qualified, that's not the issue. We're not talking about Daboll, we're talking about Brian. So they already decided Daboll's getting the job, and yet we're going to interview him because we have the Rooney Rule.
Yeah.
And so there's no way they can deny this.
But besides that, how is he going to go about proving racism?
Well, I think he's going to prove racism and say it's systemic in the NFL.
Okay.
And in there he gives a lot of examples from talking about other coaches like Steve Wilkes, David Culley, Jim Caldwell. Then he's talking about Kim Kaepernick, comparing some of these experiences to the experiences of white coaches. Let's talk about Mr. Flores himself and his experience at Miami with the Miami Dolphins.
Okay.
As Bills fans, like I said, it was a shock. We didn't think he was going to get fired. We looked through the history of the Miami Dolphins from the last 14 years. I think they've had 2 winning seasons. Tony Sparano has 4 seasons there. The last 3 were all losing seasons, and they cut him mid-season. Philbin was there, terrible. He had no winning seasons. They let him get 4 seasons. Then Gase was there. They let him have 2 losing seasons in a row before they fired him. And then along comes Flores from the Bill Belichick tree. Super, he was touted as going to be the next best thing. First season, 5-11, coming from a crappy team beforehand. He just dumped I think it was Minka Fitzpatrick too, like an all-star safety. Goes 5-11, and then the next year he goes 10-6. And then the year after that, which is this year, he goes 9-8 with Tua as quarterback. There's not an all-star team there, but he was able to coach to 2 winning seasons in a row, and then we're going to fire him on communication. So Flores has an impeccable record, and then we're going to say, we went to the Denver Broncos, and his complaint is John Elway and the owner showed up hungover to the meeting, and it was over before it started.
Yeah, no, this is looking interesting here. But that's just Flores, right? How does it prove the NFL has systemic discrimination?
Well, again, we're talking about the numbers of owners, numbers of coaches, numbers of general managers compared to the number of players. who are African American. We're going to say that's one way. The other way is we're talking about all these other examples. He brings up Tony Dungy, and like I said, Steve Wilkes. Here's a coach that I feel really bad for. He has his general manager, who's white, picks Josh Rosen as quarterback during the Josh Allen draft. They only win a few games that year, and not only are they terrible that year, that general manager who picked Josh Rosen gets a DWI, suspended 5 games. And at the end of the day, what they say is, Coach Wilkes, you're fired, we're keeping the manager. He's fine. And then they hire Cliff Kingsbury from, I think, Texas Tech, and they draft Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury have pretty much the same season as Josh Rosen, and they're like, hey, you white guy, you can keep your job. And then we talk about Jim Caldwell. Jim Caldwell has, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing the last name the right way, another black coach, has a couple winning seasons with Indianapolis Colts, and then he goes to the Detroit Lions and gets fired after having a winning season. And the thing is, let's compare all the black coaches to all the white coaches. There is an extremely tight leash on black coaches where unless we're perfect, we're out the door. He talks about the quarterback position and how we rate quarterbacks in terms of their athleticism. Look at the Josh Allen draft class with Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, to me, was one of the best pure passers coming out of college. Amazing arm, great talent. Wasn't on like an Auburn or Clemson where all his receivers were always 8 yards open at a time. But that guy had a gun, super fast, and probably the best pure passer in that class. Even though Baker Mayfield was one, Darnold, Allen, Rosen, and Lamar. And right there, the NFL scouts, hey, would you want to be a wide receiver? And
Really?
yeah, 100%. It was, you should be a wide receiver. And then we go to the coaching position, and let's talk about, hey, let's go back to Miami Dolphins himself. Sperano, 4 seasons. Philbon, 4 seasons. Gase, 3 seasons. The last 2 were losing. But all these guys had final losing seasons, non-winning seasons. They all get 4. Flores gets 1 losing season to start, 2 pretty good seasons on a rough team where his players fought for him, and they had winning records.
And they had the Bills in their division.
That is true. They did have the Bills. And so we basically stopped them from getting in the playoffs both years. But tight leash. Jim Caldwell, winning, I think I said it, he winning season, fired. I don't really see that happening with white coaches too often. And even in the Miami Dolphins, they're getting an extra year with the same ownership structure or the majority ownership structure. So I think there is a way you can prove it. I think this is an amazing complaint, and it's the NFL and these teams should be concerned.
So were the Bills mentioned in the complaint?
Well, if we go back to that caption, and it says John Doe 1 through 29, those are the remaining teams. The Bills are one of the John Does. Doesn't matter what number they are, but they're one of them. So they're saying, hey, as part of the team ownership of the NFL, you're a part of this systemic racism.
And you're part of the problem.
Yeah, you're part of the problem, you haven't been part of the solution. And then secondly, because he didn't actually name specific allegations against the Bills, but because it was Brian Daboll, the OC from Buffalo, obviously was going to be naturally mentioned in a time or two. And actually, I do like one of the things I've been hearing in the media lately. They're talking about a text from the Giants. The Giants. I think it's McDonald, who is the vice president or some guy from player personnel, texting back and forth with Flores. He's texting back with Flores about, hey, we heard Daboll isn't happy with McDermott. Again, how do we hear this? And it's like you meet with the guy, you're texting with the guy, you meet with Daboll, and you're leading Flores on like you want the job. How do you hear this when you already know you're going to hire the guy?
Yeah.
It's another thing to say, look, you already made your mind up. You already know all about the guy, and you're just going to play me along to comply with the Rooney Rule. So that's how the Bills are mentioned, not as like a direct violation of 1981 that they did to Mr. Flores, There might be some other coaches that come forward with something down the road because there has been talks of other black coaches wanting to join the suit. But the Bills were mentioned as team, 1 through 29, and just because Brian Daboll was referenced a few times.
Now, with the Bills, do we have any examples of them doing this?
Well, we don't exactly have an example, and I say this as being one of the biggest Bills fans there is. I went to the Kansas City game for the playoffs, the night game against the Patriots playoffs. I have season tickets. I went to the Jacksonville playoff game, the Houston playoff game. I love the Bills. But do we have an example of them doing some things? I would say so, in my opinion. I can't say for certain, but we look when Brian Daboll was essentially took the job. There was talks who's going to be the OC, and Ken Dorsey was getting the job. We don't hear Ken Dorsey interviewing anywhere else. Why would you not interview unless you know you're getting the job? Because you might be fired, or you have potential elsewhere. You would be interviewing elsewhere. And Josh Allen put the stamp of approval on him from day one. So maybe the decision's made, but we got to comply with the Rooney Rule, and we got to interview 2 diverse candidates. So they went out and interviewed T. Martin, the wide receiver coach from the Ravens, and then Edgar Bennett, the wide receiver coach from the Raiders, both African-American males. And the very next day, Ken Dorsey was announced as OC. So, hey, we did our due diligence, and we looked through a diverse crowd. Well, we were hiring this guy anyway, so possibly these were sham interviews, Possibly. And we just wasted these people time, and it's unfortunate. I like the intentions of the Rooney Rule, which are to open up opportunities, but to me, the sham interview for the sake of complying is disrespectful to, if it was me or anyone else.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Josh. Well, thank you for your time, man. I really appreciate you going through this and explaining the Brian Flores case. Very interested. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah, no, and everything's up in the air until the answers are filed and the chips fall where they may. But as far as being a Buffalonian, I'm looking forward to the next season and where the future holds us, both in the legal community as well as in Orchard Park.
All right. I'm John Lavelle for Joshua Ramos. Have a great day.